Hi class, we're going to pick up with lecture 2B here, and we are going to discuss checks and balances. If you remember in part A of this lecture, we discussed that the founding fathers created the three branches of government. Now, why did they do that? One of the reasons was indeed checks and balances. They feared that one branch might become too powerful, so they created three branches to keep the others in check. They all work together, but they also all make sure the other ones don't become too powerful. Therefore, every branch has the ability to severely impede the other branches from becoming too powerful or implementing too radical of change or too major of change. So really a delicate but very intelligent type of system that still persists today. So again, those three branches of government are the legislative, the judicial, and the executive branches. And again, they all check each other's power. Going on to our next slide, here you can see it broken down, some of the checks that each branch has on the other. So let's start with the executive branch. How do they check Congress? How do they keep Congress in check? One, they have the ability to veto legislation. If Congress passes a bill, the president doesn't like it, he can refuse to sign it. That is called a veto. It has to go back to Congress. They have to change it and resubmit it or be done with it, okay? How does the president check the Supreme Court? Well, the president nominates Supreme Court justices. Now, I'm just naming one for each, but I want you guys to know that there are many checks that each branch has on one another. I'm just going to name one, okay? So those are the two checks the executive branch has. Let's go to Congress now. What check does Congress have on the president? Well, they can impeach the president. If the president does something they view as violating the rules of the office, which are somewhat vague, they can impeach the president. Now, unless you've lived under a rock, you can see that our last president, President Donald Trump, was indeed impeached by the House of Representatives. What is Congress's check on the Supreme Court? One check is that they approve all presidential nominees to the Supreme Court. It goes to the Senate and they must approve of the president's pick. Last but not least, the judicial branch. What check does the judicial branch have on Congress? Well, they can declare a law passed by Congress as unconstitutional. This is a huge check, and that law is no longer. It overrides congressional law. How do the courts check on the president? Again, they can also overrule executive orders, essentially orders by the president. We'll talk more about that later, but the judicial branch has that power over the president. So those are just a few checks the branches have on each other. If you take a look at this chart, there are obviously many more. Okay, so that's checks and balances. If you have any questions, guys, and this goes for anything of the things we're talking about, please reach out to me on Canvas, reach out to me through email. I have office hours. We can schedule other office hours. I'm always here for you guys. Let's talk about something tricky now. Constitutional amendments. And I'm sure you've heard of constitutional amendments, but let's go through them anyways. Now, what we know about the US Constitution is it is extremely difficult to amend. Since the ratification of the Constitution in 1788, there have only been 27 amendments in the entire Constitution. 10 of those were added in the first 3 years as the Bill of Rights. So really in the last, 200 and whatever it is, 40 years, we've only had about 17 amendments, if you don't count the Bill of Rights. But 27 total amendments, you should remember that number. We've had 27 amendments. And having 27 amendments in that long of a time period just goes to show you how difficult it is to amend the Constitution. Now, we're going to go over the most common way to amend the Constitution. There are other ways to amend the Constitution. I'm mostly concerned you know the most common way because it's been used every single time but once. It's been used 26 out of 27 times. Okay, so I'm most concerned that you know this. You will be tested on this. It's very important that you know it. It is really a two-step process for an amendment to be passed. And again, an amendment is a change to the Constitution. So in order to change or amend the Constitution, first, the amendment has to be approved by 2/3 of both houses of Congress. In our last lecture segment, we said Congress is bicameral, meaning it has a House of Representatives and it has a Senate. In order to pass an amendment, you have to get 2/3 approval in the House and then 2/3 of approval in the Senate. Okay, most laws only need a simple majority, over 50%. So 2/3 is quite a bit. If by some miracle it gets through both the House and the Senate with 2/3 approval, which almost never happens, then it goes to state legislatures. Every state has their own legislative branch, their own Congress. 3/4, 75% of all state legislatures must also agree that they want to amend the Constitution. 75% of states. So you can see why this is extremely difficult and why we almost never have amendments, okay? Getting 2/3 approval in both houses is hard enough because Democrats and Republicans don't agree on anything. So what are the chances 2/3 of them are going to agree on something? And then let's take it to the states. States are very different. Think how different New York is than Texas, California is than Alabama. Can you see 75% of states agreeing on one issue? Probably not, right? So because of these reasons, it is very, very difficult to amend the Constitution. So here's an interesting chart that shows the other ways you can amend the Constitution. But again, I'm only concerned that you know the most common way. And again, you can see that on this chart. Amendment is proposed and passed by 2/3 of both houses, and then 3/4 of state legislatures. You can also see alternative ways if you follow the arrows, but I'm not too concerned that you know those. Okay, so let's talk now about the Bill of Rights. I mentioned them before, and they are very important. The Bill of Rights is the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. They were added within the first 3 years of the ratification, after the ratification of the Constitution. So, 1788 to 1791, roughly. And these are where we gain most of our personal freedoms, such as speech, assembly, religion, and press. So they're very, very important. In fact, when you think of the Constitution, you're most likely thinking of the First Amendment, right? Freedom of speech, assembly, right to petition the government. All the things that affect our daily life, a lot of them are in the Bill of Rights. A lot of them are in the first few amendments. Okay, so last theme we go before we end this short video is constitutional interpretation. Now, I mentioned before, the Constitution is incredibly vague and very ambiguous in certain parts. So that leads to a debate on how we should interpret the Constitution. And there's generally two parties. You have those who are in favor of originalism, and you have those who are in favor of a living or breathing Constitution. I'll explain both to you, okay? If you're an originalist, if you believe in originalism, you think that the Constitution's meaning should not change, okay? It's a legal document, therefore it should not change. We should follow that document, all right? Legal documents' meanings do not change. If, however, you're in favor of a living or breathing Constitution, you believe the interpretation and meaning of the Constitution should change to fit the time. So how we look at and interpret the Constitution should change, be fluid and dynamic. Generally speaking, Republicans tend to favor originalism, right? Less change, more historical, whereas Democrats tend to favor a living Constitution because it makes it easier to pass more progressive legislation or progressive ideas, I should say. Okay, so kind of think how you view the Constitution. Do you think that it should be something that's constantly changing to fit our time? Or do you think, like some other legal documents, that no, we should be going off what the founding fathers wrote? It really is quite an interesting question. Okay, that wraps up this section of video. I will speak to you guys soon.